You dip your finger into wet red ochre paste. You press your palm flat against cold limestone deep inside a cave. You lift a hollow bone to your lips and blow a fine mist of crushed charcoal across the back of your hand. When you pull away, a ghostly outline stares back at you from the rock, frozen there for anyone who comes after you. For decades, scientists assumed only one species on Earth was capable of this. Then, in 2018, a team led by geochronologist Dirk Hoffman and archaeologist João Zilhão used uranium-thorium dating on the mineral crust growing over paintings in three Spanish caves, La Pasiega, Maltravieso, and Ardalis. The crust itself was more than 64,000 years old. That means the art underneath it had to be older still. Older by roughly 20,000 years than the first modern humans to ever set foot in Europe. The artist wasn't your ancestor. Not the one you're picturing, anyway. It was a Neanderthal. Sit with that for a second. The word Neanderthal has become an insult in everyday English. We use it to mean stupid, brutish, backward. A slur borrowed from a species that went extinct roughly 40,000 years ago. But is that fair? What if the popular image is less science and more leftover Victorian prejudice? This is the detail that gets me every time. We named an insult after a species that was making abstract art on cave walls before we even arrived on their continent. Let's back up. Who actually were the Neanderthals? They weren't a failed rough draft of humanity. They were a separate human species, Homo neanderthalensis, who lived across Europe and parts of Western Asia for roughly 400,000 years. 400,000 years is not a short stay. For comparison, Homo sapiens you have existed as a species for around 300,000 years. Total. Neanderthals outlasted us before we ever showed up to compete with them. They weren't hunched, dim-witted brutes shuffling through an ice age. That image comes largely from a single flawed reconstruction of a skeleton in 1911 made by a scientist who didn't realize his specimen had severe arthritis, and from a century of cultural retelling that never bothered to correct it. Modern anatomical studies show Neanderthals stood upright, had a nasal structure suited to processing cold, dry air, and this is the part that surprises people, an average brain volume slightly larger than yours. Bigger isn't automatically smarter. Brain organization matters as much as size. But small-brained was never accurate to begin with. So what did that brain actually do? Start with technology. At sites across Europe, archaeologists have recovered Levallois technique stone tools, a method requiring a toolmaker to visualize the finished blade inside a raw stone core before striking a single flake. That's forward planning, not trial and error. Researcher Paul Kozowick and colleagues went further, reconstructing how Neanderthals may have produced birch bark tar, an adhesive used to haft stone points onto wooden shafts. Kozowick's experiments showed this could be done with a simple method, rolling birch bark into an ember and letting it smolder in a pit without needing pottery or precise temperature control. It's a small detail, but it points to something bigger. Hunting tells a similar story. At Leringen in Germany, archaeologists recovered a wooden spear, roughly 6 feet long and carved to a sharpened point, still lodged in the rib of a straight-tusked elephant. The site dates to around 120,000 years ago, deep in Neanderthal territory. Carving a spear that precise out of a single piece of yew wood takes hours of deliberate work. Using it to bring down an animal that size takes coordination between multiple hunters, not a lone figure swinging a club. This wasn't opportunistic scavenging. It was planned, cooperative, and dangerous. Fire tells you something else entirely. For a long time, textbooks treated fire use among early humans as accidental grabbing embers from a lightning strike when convenient. Archaeologists Will Robrooks and Paula Villa reviewed the evidence across dozens of European sites and found something different. Systematic, repeated hearth construction going back at least 300,000 years, well within the Neanderthal timeline. That means routine fire starting, fuel management, and probably cooking as a daily habit, not a lucky accident. Cooking softens food, kills pathogens, and unlocks calories raw food can't deliver. It's hard to build a settled social life around a fire pit without also building conversation, teaching, and shared routine around it. Now consider food. Popular culture loves the image of Neanderthals as pure carnivores, ripping into mammoth haunches around a fire. Researcher Amanda Henry examined dental calculus, the hardened plaque on fossil teeth from Neanderthal, remains at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, and Spy Cave in Belgium. Trapped inside that ancient plaque were microscopic starch granules from cooked plants, including what appear to be grains and possibly bitter medicinal plants like yarrow and chamomile. Their diet was not simple. It adapted to whatever region they lived in, and there's early evidence they understood which plants soothed illness, even if we can't say for certain they used them medicinally on purpose. Researchers are still split on how deliberate that plant selection really was. Now for something stranger. At Krapina, a site in Croatia dating back roughly 130,000 years, archaeologist David Frere and colleagues identified a set of white-tailed eagle talons bearing cut marks and polish consistent with being strung together, likely as jewelry or a symbolic ornament, not a tool, not a food source. An eagle talon necklace made tens of thousands of years before modern humans reached that part of Europe. Ornamentation like this isn't about survival. It's about meaning, identity, maybe status. Something a species is not supposed to care about if all it's doing is scraping by. There's more. In Gorham's Cave, Gibraltar, researcher Joaquin Rodriguez Vidal and colleagues documented a deliberate crosshatch pattern engraved into bedrock, sealed beneath sediment layers, containing only Neanderthal-associated tools. No modern human material anywhere near it. It isn't a hunting scene or an animal outline. It's an abstract geometric pattern, carved for no obvious practical reason at all. Some researchers argue this is exactly the kind of non-utilitarian mark-making we usually treat as proof of modern symbolic thought. Others urge caution, noting that a single engraved pattern is thinner evidence than a cave full of painted animals, and that we shouldn't overstate what one crosshatch can tell us about an entire species' inner life. Both cautions are worth holding on to, at once. Here's where it gets harder to explain away as instinct. At Shanidar Cave, a Neanderthal skeleton known as Shanidar 1 shows a body that had endured enormous trauma and kept living anyway. A withered, partially amputated right arm, evidence of blindness in one eye, hearing loss, and a healed leg fracture. This individual could not have hunted, gathered efficiently, or fully defended himself for years before he died. And yet he lived into what would have been late middle age for a Neanderthal. Someone had to be bringing him food. Someone had to be protecting him. The original excavator, Ralph Selecki, went further and argued that pollen found near a nearby Shanidar burial suggested flowers had been deliberately placed with the dead, a claim that made headlines as the flower burial. That specific claim is now heavily disputed. Later researchers pointed out the pollen could have been introduced by burrowing rodents, not human hands. It's worth saying plainly, the flowers were probably not intentional, but the survival of Shanidar 1 himself isn't in question. That part of the story doesn't need embellishment to be remarkable. Let's reconstruct a day, because it's easy to lose the human thread in a list of studies. Picture the group moving through a cold valley in what is now northern Iraq, perhaps 60,000 years ago. Shanidar 1 can't keep pace on the hunt anymore. He waits near the fire while others track game. When they return, someone hands him a portion of meat before eating their own. It costs the group calories they didn't have to spare. They do it anyway. Nearby, someone else works a stone cord down to a fine blade with dozens of careful strikes, glancing up occasionally to check the angle against the light. A third figure grinds red ochre between two stones, mixing it with fat, preparing to mark a rock wall, or maybe their own skin. Two children sit close to the fire, watching an older adult roll birch bark into a smoldering coil, learning by copying rather than by instruction. Somebody hums, or something like humming. We have no way to know if it carried a tune. By the time the light fails, the group is fed, the tools are repaired, and the fire is banked to survive until morning. None of this is happening because a script told them to. It's happening because, apparently, this is what a Neanderthal life actually looked like. Now, the twist, and it's a real one, not a rhetorical trick. If Neanderthals were this capable, why are you here instead of them? The honest answer is, it's complicated, and researchers don't fully agree. It wasn't a simple story of modern humans being smarter and outcompeting a lesser species. The evidence above makes that framing hard to defend. Some researchers point to small, fragmented Neanderthal populations that may have struggled with reduced genetic diversity over time. Others point to a string of brutal climate shifts near the end of the last ice age that hit small, dispersed groups harder than larger modern human populations. And Svante Pääbo's genome sequencing work, which earned him the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physiology, or Medicine, revealed something that complicates the word extinct itself: Neanderthals and modern humans interbred. Most people with ancestry outside sub-Saharan Africa carry somewhere between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA today, including genes linked to immune response and skin. Neanderthals didn't simply vanish. Part of them is folded into you, which brings us to what this actually means for you. Sitting here, watching this on a screen they couldn't have imagined. It's tempting to draw a clean line, they were just like us, and call it a day. That would be overselling it. Neanderthal and modern human cognition weren't identical. The archaeological record, the size of their social networks, and the pace of technological change across their 400,000 years all look different from ours. But different and primitive are not the same word, and for a century, we quietly treated them as synonyms. The eagle talons, the birch tar, the cave paintings, the arthritic man who ate dinner because his group chose to feed him none. Of that fits the shuffling brute from the museum diorama. Maybe the real discomfort isn't that Neanderthals were smarter or dumber than you. Maybe it's that they were recognizably, uncomfortably, people capable of art, medicine, ornament, and care for members who could offer nothing back in return. And we spent 100 years using their name as a punchline anyway. Think about how quickly modern life still sorts people into productive and not. How much of your own worth gets measured by output on a good week? Shanidar one produced nothing measurable for years, and his group fed him anyway. That's not a tidy lesson about kindness across the ages. The evidence can't tell us their motive, whether it was affection, obligation, or something else entirely. Researchers genuinely disagree on how to read it. But it is a fact that a disabled member of an unintelligent species was kept alive by people who had every practical reason to let him go. Whatever else that record can or can't prove, it's worth sitting with. You dip your finger into wet red ochre paste. Somewhere, so did they, thousands of centuries before you existed to judge them for it.